A starving German shepherd stood motionless in the snow, her ribs visible beneath a coat dusted with frost. She made no sound, only watching the man, a battle-hardened Navy SEAL, long estranged from mercy, as he gently placed food on the ice-cold ground. That night he believed it was done. Just another fleeting kindness swallowed by the harsh winter. Yet the next dawn she came back not alone. Clearing his throat, he saw behind her 2 fragile puppies stumbling through the snow, their soft whimpers blending with the drifting flakes. In that instant, the soldier whose hope had all but vanished found a reason to fight for something again. Before we dive deeper, tell me, where are you watching from? Share your country down in the comments below. The Cascade Mountains in the early grip of winter felt like a world half asleep, wrapped tightly in silence and snow. Pines bowed heavily beneath white blankets, creeks froze mid-melody, and the wind carried a hollow song through the ridges. It was the kind of stillness that could swallow a man whole. And for Logan Hayes, that was exactly what he sought. 3 months ago he'd driven north, following roads that shifted from asphalt to gravel, then to mere frozen dirt trails. When he arrived at the small wooden cabin nestled deep in the forest, he stopped, turned off the engine, and never glanced back. The place had been deserted for years, its roof patched with corroded tin, a porch creaking like old bones, a stove that smoked more than it warmed. But to Logan, it was enough. It was solitude, and that was precisely what he needed. He was 38, tall and lean, carrying strength forged from years of rigorous discipline. His dark brown hair was cropped short, streaked with gray strands, and a light beard framed a face etched with hard lines, etched not by age but by trial and sacrifice. His eyes were a steely blue-gray, unreadable to most, yet beneath their cold surface lay a heavy, restless soul. Once a Navy SEAL steady in combat, unshakable under pressure, the war had left deep cracks in him that no one else could see. At night, the nightmares returned. Sandstorms, gunfire, a convoy shattered by explosions. He could still hear his friend's voice breaking through broken radio static, still feel the fading grasp of a dying man slipping from his hold. In those dark moments, he was no longer in the Cascade Mountains. He was back in the desert, trying to rescue a soul he ultimately could not save. Quiet days drifted by in the cabin. Logan chopped wood, mended the weathered fence, sealed leaks in the aging roof. He spoke to no one, not even to himself. The only sound within the cabin was the steady, gentle crackling of the fire, a fragile reminder that he was still breathing. His meals were basic coffee-canned beans, sometimes soup. He didn't mind the simplicity. In truth, he welcomed it. Simplicity asked no questions. The nearest town, Silver Pine, sat 10 miles down a snow-laden road, a tiny place where strangers still received waves of welcome. He avoided it, except when supplies ran low. But one afternoon, as he hauled firewood from the shed, he spotted someone ascending the hill, a small woman cloaked in a thick gray coat, steadily making her way through the snow. When she reached the porch, she called out, "Mr. Hayes, Logan Hayes." He cracked the door open, eyes wary. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled warmly, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "My name is Margaret Dawson. I live just a little ways down the valley. You're the one who bought the Carter cabin, right?" She looked to be around 70, a bit short and slightly rounded at the shoulders, silver hair tucked carefully beneath a knitted hat. Her skin showed the soft grace of age, but her eyes sparkled with warmth and wisdom, eyes that had witnessed hardship and yet learned to forgive. "I brought something for you," she said, extending a small basket. The scent of baked apples wafted from beneath the cloth. "Welcome pie. It's a local tradition." Logan hesitated before accepting it. "That's very kind of you." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just wait until you taste it." She chuckled gently, then added, "You probably don't get many visitors out here." "Not exactly the place to entertain guests," he responded. "That's what my husband used to say after coming back from Vietnam," she said softly. He came back quieter than when he left. Baking was what coaxed his words back again. Sometimes he'd knead the dough until he forgot what was weighing on his mind. Her voice wasn't pitying, just steady and sincere, like a grandmother speaking to someone she already cared deeply about. Logan had no words, so he simply nodded. Margaret glanced around the modest cabin. The lone chair by the fire, a stack of books still untouched on the table, the rifle resting quietly by the door. "You keep things tidy," she remarked. "That's good. A clean home keeps your mind from drifting too far." "I try," he replied. "Well," she said, adjusting her scarf, "I brew coffee every morning at 9. If you ever want to hear another person's breath, you're always welcome to stop by." He almost smiled. "I'll remember that." She studied him a moment longer, as if recognizing a pain she couldn't fix, but still wanted to ease. Then she nodded and made her way back down the hill, boots leaving neat tracks in the snow. Once she was gone, the silence settled back, heavier than before. Logan sat by the window watching the light fade from pale gray to deep blue. He thought about Margaret's words quieter than when he left. That phrase echoed in his mind long after the fire had died down. The days that followed grew colder. Snow fell without end, covering the cabin, until everything outside was nothing but a white, empty canvas. Logan's routine became automatic. Wake stoke the fire, chop wood, eat, sleep. Some evenings he stood outside at dusk, gazing at the lights in the valley below. It made him feel caught somewhere between the living and the lost. That night the storm finally arrived. Wind roared through the pines, snow slashing sideways across the clearing. The cabin trembled with every gust. Logan tossed another log on the fire and wrapped his coat tighter. The solitude of winter had a way of sinking beneath the skin, whispering old voices in the darkness. Then he heard a subtle sound beneath the wind, not the snap of branches, nor the creak of the porch, a soft scraping like footsteps moving against the wooden floor. He stood alert, listening. The sound came again, this time closer, right outside the door. Logan moved cautiously, his instincts kicking in, the soldier within alert and ready. He grabbed the lantern and cracked the door open just enough. Through the swirling snow, he saw her. A German shepherd stood quietly at the porch's edge, half concealed by the swirling, whispering snow. Her coat was a muted blend of black and tan, crusted with ice and grime. She was gaunt, painfully thin ribs visible beneath her fur, tail drawn low. Her breath drifted in gentle clouds as she lowered her head, sniffing hungrily near the steps for any remnants. For a long, hushed moment, neither stirred. Logan's lantern flickered softly, casting a warm glow across her weary face. Her eyes locked onto his deep amber gaze, wild, intelligent, trembling with a fragile mix of fear and hope. Something sparked deep within him, a feeling long buried. Compassion, a quiet human kindness awakened without warning. "Hey," he whispered softly, voice calm and steady. "Easy now." The dog froze, ears perked, no growl, no flight, just a steady, watchful gaze. Logan scanned the cabin. Little lay within but a lone can of chicken stew from last night. After a pause, he took it, cracked open the door wider, and gingerly set a small plate of food by the steps. The cold bit at his skin. "Take it," he breathed gently, stepping back inside, giving her space. Through frosted glass, he waited. Minutes stretched in silence, pierced only by the sighing wind. Then movement. The German shepherd crept forward cautiously, paws pressing softly into the snow. She sniffed the offering, glanced once toward the window, then began to eat, tentative at first, then ravenous. Hunger slowly drowning out fear. Logan remained still silently watching. There was something in her stance, the vigilant glances toward the trees, the protective curve in her posture, that told him she was not alone, yet there was no sign of another. When she finished, she retreated, disappearing into the storm with ghost-like silence as she had first appeared. Logan stayed at the window, eyes fixed on the empty plate, still steaming faintly in the cold snow. Outside, the wind howled once more, carrying her scent and the memory of her into the night. He couldn't say why he cared. Perhaps because she was lost. Maybe because he too was adrift. Before turning in for the night, he poured the last of his meager food into another bowl and placed it near the door. Just in case, he whispered, closing the latch with a soft click. The snow deepened, falling in endless silent waves. Inside the fire smoldered low, casting amber shadows that danced along the cabin walls. Logan sat longer still, listening to the storm's fury, thinking of a stray mother somewhere out there, fighting tooth and nail for survival. And for the first time since his arrival in these mountains, the silence no longer felt hollow. Dawn broke pale and peaceful, a winter morning so still it seemed the world was forged of glass. The storm had passed, leaving a delicate frost in its wake. Logan awoke to the muffled quiet that follows a heavy snowfall and moved to the window. The porch lay buried in white, but near the steps his eyes caught something tracks. Not one set, but three. The larger paw prints were unmistakable hers, the mother German shepherd from the night before. And beside those smaller, lighter prints darted alongside hers, weaving in and out of her path. Puppies. He stepped outside, snow crunching firm beneath his boots. The cold stung his cheeks, yet he hardly noticed. The young prince circled the porch, then turned back toward the forest, faint trails slipping away into the dense pines. Logan crouched low, examining them intently. His breath painted frosty clouds in the crisp morning air. 2 pairs of tiny paws marked the scene. 2 puppies, a family, bound together. He stood silently, lungs filled with the biting cold. Somewhere out in that vast white wilderness, a mother fought desperately to keep her young alive. He thought of the hunger, the relentless struggle, the raw, unyielding will required to endure a winter this brutal. It stirred something deep within him, something long asleep. Returning inside, he grabbed a tin of leftover stew and carried it out to the tree line. He placed it gently on a flat rock half hidden beneath the snow, then stepped back. "Come when you need to," he whispered. Then he turned away and went back inside, convincing himself it didn't matter if they returned or not. But when dusk fell, it found his gaze drawn once again to the window. That evening, as the fire burned low and steady, a knock came at the door. Not the quiet tapping of paws this time, but the firm sound of a human knock. Logan opened it to find Margaret Dawson standing there, again wrapped in her same worn gray coat, a wool scarf snugly wound around her neck. Snowflakes dusted her hat, and in her gloved hands rested a steaming pot. "Chicken soup," she announced. "Looks like you're the kind of man who forgets to eat when his mind's elsewhere." Logan offered a weak smile. "You might be right." Without waiting, she stepped inside, not just invited, but truly welcome, setting the pot down on his table. "Your house feels too empty. I figured I'd bring a little noise inside." He ladled 2 bowls and handed one to her. "I'm not great with words," he admitted. "Then I'll do the talking for the both of us." She smiled, settling close by the fire. The warmth deepened the gentle lines around her eyes. "My husband Tom was just like you after Vietnam, silent for weeks on end. Then one day he brought home a half-starved mutt from the junkyard, one ear missing, full of courage. He named him Lucky. Said saving that dog was the first time he truly felt human again." Logan glanced down into his soup. "Did it help?" "In ways he never spoke of," she replied softly. "Sometimes, saving another living soul is proof we can still feel that the world hasn't stolen that from us." Her words hung between them like soft ash falling on cold earth. Logan didn't speak, but there was no need. She saw the flicker of understanding flare in his eyes, that restless stirring that creeps in when a heart is moved against its own will. When Margaret left later that afternoon, storm clouds were already gathering beyond the ridge. Logan watched her fade into the gray expanse, her figure shrinking among the snow-laden trees. He found himself holding on to her story deep into the night. He didn't believe in fate or signs, but the image of that starving mother dog and his own haunting memory of a life lost merged in a way he couldn't shake. As twilight slipped away, he stepped out onto the porch. The air was heavy with the cold, metallic scent of another storm on the horizon. At the forest's edge, the empty food dish lay scrubbed clean. His heart lifted in a quiet hope he couldn't quite explain. The German shepherd had come back. She'd found what she was searching for. Maybe tonight she'd feed her pups. The wind whispered through the towering pines as Logan stepped inside to stack more wood on the fire. He sat quietly for a long time, eyes locked on the flickering flames haunted by the image of her. The dog, her ribs showing those deep amber eyes, and the quiet strength in the way she faced him. He pictured her curled protectively around her pups, shielding them from the chilling wind. He wondered how many nights she'd done that, how many more she could endure. Rising slowly, he fetched an old blanket from the storage chest, carrying it out to the porch. It's probably foolish, he told himself. Wild animals survive on their own. Yet, he folded the blanket neatly and placed it just under the overhang by the door sheltered from the snow. As night deepened, the wind howled louder, more fierce than before. Snow pounded against the cabin in relentless waves. The windows rattled, while the cold crept sharply inside. Logan fed the flames with his last piece of wood. Then settled close to the stove, he listened to the storm's raging fury. Hours slipped by. The blizzard only intensified. Between restless sleep and waking, a faint sound caught his attention. Not the groan of bending timber or the storm's cry, but something nearer, a scraping, followed by a frail, desperate whimper. Logan snapped awake. The sound repeated soft, yet insistent scratching at the door. Heart pounding, he grabbed his lantern and crossed the room. Throwing the door open, the cold slammed into him like a crashing wave. Snow whipped inside, biting his face and hands. And there she stood, the German shepherd mother, trembling on the porch, her fur soaked heavy with glistening snow. Her breath came rapid, ribs rising with every sharp exhale. But her eyes, those familiar amber eyes, locked with his, filled with raw, pleading vulnerability. She took a shaky step forward, then paused, glancing behind her. Logan followed. Two tiny figures huddled close to the porch rail. Puppies no older than 6 weeks, black and tan like their mother, fur stiff with ice. They whimpered faintly, too chilled to move. "Oh God," he breathed. The mother let out a low, broken bark, then looked back at him, not in menace, but in a desperate plea. Logan sank to his knees, his breath drifting in the lantern's warm glow. He reached out slowly, careful not to frighten. "It's all right?" he whispered. "You did well bringing them here." The mother stayed still but relaxed a little, her trembling easing. Logan gently lifted one pup into his hands. It was limp, but breathing, eyes half shut, icy fur brushing his fingers. He scooped up the second, cradling both tenderly against his chest. They weighed nearly nothing, fragile bones chilled to the core. Standing, the mother dog followed him to the doorway, stopping just short of stepping inside. Snow swirled around her legs, dusting the porch in white. "You can come in," Logan said softly. "Just for tonight?" Torn between instinct and trust, she hesitated before cautiously stepping into the warmth. The cabin's heat hit her at once. She shook off a sprinkle of melting snow before settling down close to the fire. Logan gently placed the pups beside her. She nudged them tenderly, licking their ears, soft whines escaping as they stirred. Logan knelt by the fire, eyes fixed on the little family now nestled together on his rug. For what felt like an eternity, he remained silent. Then, barely audible, he murmured to himself, "You're safe now?" Outside, the wind howled fiercely through the trees, but inside, the only sound was the gentle rhythm of breathing, a life finally shielded. Snow had been falling relentlessly since the break of dawn. The mountains beyond Logan's cabin appeared like a masterpiece painted entirely in pristine white. Trees stooped under the heavy weight of ice. Inside, the warmth radiated from the old iron stove, casting a soft, amber glow that danced along the wooden walls. The mother German shepherd lay curled close to the fire, her two pups nestled against her warm belly, their fur still damp from melting snow, and one of the little ones whimpered quietly with each shaky breath. It was the smaller pup whose hind leg hung at an unnatural angle. Logan knelt down beside them, a soldier's instinct for urgent care stirring within him like second nature. He examined the pup's leg. A slight swelling suggested a sprain, or perhaps a minor fracture. Though his tools were limited, he knew he could ease the pain. He warmed a rag in hot water, his hands steady, but his heart surprisingly unsettled. It had been years since he'd nurtured anything so delicate. War had toughened. His hands made them strong, but awkward in gentleness. Now, as he wrapped the pup's leg tenderly with torn fabric from an old undershirt, he felt an unfamiliar stir deep in his chest, a guarded tenderness, a memory of protecting without breaking. "You're going to be all right," he whispered, although the pup could not yet understand. The mother dog watched him intently throughout her body, taut with alertness, her gaze fixed on every careful motion he made. She did not growl nor move, but her posture was primed to defend if the line was crossed. Logan spoke softly to her, using a tone once reserved for calming wounded soldiers on the battlefield. "Easy, I'm here to help." His voice cracked with emotion. "I promise." Minutes slipped by. Slowly the German shepherd lowered her head, her amber eyes growing gentle. She nuzzled the pup's ear, then met Logan's gaze again, not with fear, but with quiet acknowledgement. That single gesture carried more weight than any words. It was the first spark of trust he'd felt from another soul, human or animal, in many years. After tending to the pup, Logan retrieved an old wool blanket and spread it near the stove. He coaxed the mother dog closer, careful never to pressure her. She hesitated just a moment before stepping silently forward on the wooden floor. When she finally settled down, the firelight caught the delicate curve of her ribs and the glossy sheen of her black and tan coat. She sighed deeply, as if surrendering to warmth for the very first time in weeks. Logan seated himself across from her, the firelight burning between them, and for a long moment neither stirred. The storm raged outside, but inside the world held its breath. The next morning dawned cold and gray. Logan brewed coffee and prepared a small pot of oatmeal, mixing in scraps of meat for the dogs. The cabin brimmed with the scent of wood smoke and new life. As the puppies stumbled, still weak but filled with curiosity, Logan realized a smile had crept onto his face, though he hadn't noticed when it began. The smaller pup limped slightly, yet managed to stand wobbling unsteadily towards the food bowl. The mother gently nudged them forward with her nose leading the way. Logan's soft chuckle slipped out a sound that felt unfamiliar to him. A sudden knock at the door jolted them all. The mother let out a low, warning growl, and Logan raised his hand calmly to soothe her. "It's all right," he whispered, standing up. He opened the door to reveal Margaret Dawson standing quietly on the porch. Her cheeks flushed rosy pink from the biting cold, and frost dusted the knit cap resting on her head. Cradled in her arms was a small wicker basket draped with a vibrant red cloth. "I saw the smoke," she said with a warm smile. "Figured you could use some company before the next storm traps us all inside." Her gaze drifted straight to the dogs. "Well, would you look at that?" she breathed softly. "Seems you've made yourself some friends." Logan stepped aside, inviting her in without hesitation. "They found me," he said quietly. "Or maybe it was the other way around." Margaret set the basket down gently and leaned in closer, her face softening. "Oh, those poor souls. That mother's been battling the mountains for weeks, I'm sure. Just look at those eyes, so sharp, yet wearied at the same time." The older woman knelt with effort, joints creaking under the strain as she settled near the warming fire. Though the mother tensed, she stayed put. Margaret extended a weathered hand, letting the dog carefully sniff her fingers. "You've done an incredible job, sweetheart," she whispered gently. "Not every soul survives a winter this fierce." Logan observed them both, feeling a quiet tension ease within him. "You've got a gift with creatures like this." Margaret smiled knowingly. "Years of experience teach you patience. I used to help my husband when he brought home injured strays. Never could walk away from a creature in need. He always said that's how we hold on to our humanity, by caring for those who can't help themselves." Her voice softened, carrying a note of reflection. After the war, Tom wasn't the same man. He would sit by the door for hours, staring into nothingness. Then one day he found a wounded bird buried in the snow. He spent 2 weeks nursing it back to life until it took flight once more. Said that bird saved him far more than he saved it. Logan glanced at the dogs again. The puppies now deep in sleep, the mother resting but ever watchful. I think I get that, he murmured. Margaret met his eyes with a knowing smile. When people lose too much, they start shutting out the world. But life has this way of sneaking back in. Sometimes it comes on 4 legs covered in snow. For the better part of the morning, she stayed helping him prepare meals for the dogs, patiently teaching him how to blend softened oats with broth for the pups. She moved through the cabin with a gentle grace, softly humming ancient hymns beneath her breath. When it was time to go, she paused at the doorway, casting a last look back at him. You ought to give her a name," she said softly. "Names remind us of the lives we've saved." After she left, Logan sank back down by the fire once again. The cabin now felt warmer, richer somehow. The mother lay stretched out, head resting on her crossed paws, eyes half closed, yet still tracking every one of his movements. He studied her, the rise and fall of her steady chest, the faint scars marking her right side, the fierce intelligence glowing in her gaze. She had fought fiercely to survive, to protect what mattered most. It called to mind the women waiting patiently for their loved ones to return from battle. Quiet strength, unwavering faith. It stirred memories of the women waiting for soldiers to return, quiet resilience, unwavering hope. "Grace," he finally spoke. The name resonated, gentle yet unwavering. "Your name is Grace." The German shepherd lifted her head slightly, as if she recognized it. Then she exhaled softly and rested it back down. Her pups nestled tightly beside her. Logan leaned back in his chair, eyes tracing the flickering firelight as it danced across the cabin's wooden walls. For the first time in years, a tension loosened deep within his chest. He realized he had smiled more in a single day than in the past 5 years. It wasn't much yet. It was a beginning, a brief spark of warmth in a life grown cold and worn. Outside snow continued to drift silently over the Cascade Forest. But inside the cabin, a gentle warmth had finally claimed its place. Winter in the Cascades was harsh, its grip relentless. Days slipped by, marked only by the soft rhythm of falling snow and the distant caw of a raven perched high in the trees. Logan's cabin, once an empty sanctuary of silence, had transformed into something alive, a place humming with quiet life. The scurry of paws across wooden floors, the gentle whimpers of puppies dreaming near the fire, the slow, steady breath of a man relearning how to live. Grace had blossomed over these weeks, her coat thickened, gleaming with health, her ribs no longer sharp beneath the blend of tan and black. Though still guarded, the terror once blazing in her amber eyes had softened. She trusted Logan now, not blindly, but with the cautious strength of one who has weathered too many storms to trust without care. The 2 pups, now 8 weeks old, were tiny forces of raw energy. The bolder one, marked by a striking white blaze on his chest, delighted in tugging at Logan's bootlaces. The smaller pup, born with a limp from injury, shadowed Grace everywhere, learning to walk steady on legs still healing. Logan had built them a simple shelter behind the cabin. Nothing fancy, just a lean-to made of wood and tarp, a quiet refuge when they sought space. Each morning he filled a bowl with creek water and another with fresh food. Whenever he stepped outside to split wood or check the traps, the pups followed behind in a wobbly parade through the snow, their tiny paws leaving delicate traces beside his heavy boot prints. Grace watched over them all, never straying more than a few feet away, her stance both protective and proudly resolute. Their days found a rhythm. Logan would chop wood until aching muscles reminded him he was alive, the steady motion grounding his scattered mind. The pups would explore nearby, sniffing the cold air and tumbling in play. Sometimes at dusk, he'd settle on the porch steps with a cup of coffee, watching them frolic in the snow. Those moments, fleeting and fragile, made him almost forget why he had arrived here to escape life itself. One crisp morning, a crunch in the snow startled him. He turned to see Margaret Dawson climbing the hill, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She wore a heavy brown coat, and a knitted green hat that drooped slightly to the side. Her arms carried something wrapped snugly in a quilt. "Looks like a man who could use some warmth," she called out, smiling as she reached him. "What's your excuse this time?" Logan chuckled. "Bread," she replied with pride. "And company, if you can bear it." He took the bundle, the comforting heat seeping through his gloves. "You know you don't have to trek all the way up here every week." "I know," she answered, brushing snow from her jacket. "But if I didn't, you might forget how to speak again." Grace stepped forward cautiously, ears alert. Margaret bent down, her knees softly cracking, as she greeted the dog like an old companion. "There's my fearless girl. You've been keeping him in check, haven't you?" she said, rubbing behind Grace's ears. The German shepherd leaned into the comforting touch, her tail wagging gently. Inside, over warm tea and fresh bread, Margaret watched the dogs play near the fire. "You did well, Logan. Most folks would have sent them off to a shelter." "It didn't really go as planned," he admitted. "They just showed up." "Life has a way of working like that," she said with a knowing smile. "The things worth saving don't always knock politely." She studied him, her eyes tender yet sharp beneath silver lashes. "Ever thought about writing this down?" "Writing?" He raised a brow. "I'm no writer. You don't have to be. You just need to speak the truth," she replied. "There's a magazine, Veterans in Wildlife. They share stories about people like you, men who've seen too much yet still manage to care. I think they'd want to hear your story." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I wouldn't know where to begin." "Start with her," Margaret said, nodding to Grace. "Every meaningful story begins with something that changes you." After she left, her words hung in the air. That night, Logan found himself seated at the small table by the window. A notebook lay open before him, his handwriting uneven and slow at first. He wrote about the storm the moment he found Grace, how she brought her puppies to his doorstep. But as his pen moved, other memories began to surface: the desert, the crackle of gunfire faces etched deep in his mind. He hadn't planned to write about those things, but they flowed out nonetheless, as if recalling Grace had unlocked something buried deep within. He paused to watch the ink dry on the page. For the first time, the memories didn't overwhelm him. They simply existed like scars that no longer sting when touched. Writing didn't erase his past, but it softened the jagged edges. Outside, the wind sighed softly through the pines. Grace shifted by the fire, one ear twitching at the sound before settling back down. Her puppies nestled close at her side, warm and safe. Logan gazed at them and cleared his throat, smiling faintly. "You're healing too," he whispered. In the days that followed, he kept writing. Each night after feeding the dogs and stoking the fire, he penned a few more pages. The story was raw, but it was real. Margaret visited again, bringing him an old, battered Remington typewriter, one that had belonged to her husband. She told him he used it to write letters when words felt too heavy to speak aloud. Logan accepted the gift with quiet appreciation. He didn't tell her, but typing gave the words a permanence he hadn't felt before. He began to mold his thoughts into a fragile semblance of hope. By mid-February, the snow had started to ease. He kept it to himself, yet typing those words made them feel more permanent, more tangible. He started molding his thoughts into something resembling hope. By mid-February, the snow was beginning to ease. Clear's throat. Earth patches emerged through the snowdrifts near the cabin's edge. The air still bit sharply at his skin, yet the days stretched longer, the sunsets glowing with a warmer hue. Logan found himself quietly chuckling when the pups got too rambunctious, or when Grace swiped a glove from his hand just as he swung the axe. He'd half-heartedly curse, chase after her through the snow, only to break into laughter once more. It felt as though the cold was finally pulling back, not just from the land, but from the corners of his heart. That evening, seated by the stove writing, Grace suddenly lifted her head. Her ears twitched, body tense and stiff. Logan froze. Then he heard a faint crunch of snow outside, deliberate and slow. The puppy stirred, but held back from barking. Grace's gaze locked on the window, her fur standing on end. Logan gently set down the pen and reached for the lantern. The flame flickered as he stood. He moved to the window and peered into the night's shadows. The trees stood solemn and still beneath the moonlight, their long shadows stretching across the snow's surface. For a breath there was nothing but silence. Then a shape shifted near the tree line, swift, yet unmistakably there, too large to be a fox. Grace's growl rumbled low and fierce, a clear warning. Easy Logan murmured, his breath fogging the glass. "Stay calm." Yet even as he spoke, his heart raced. The shadow moved again, weaving through the pines, drawing closer. He dimmed the lantern, letting the cabin sink into a soft orange glow. Grace stayed fixed by the window, eyes razor-sharp, body taut. Logan's hand instinctively gripped the rifle resting against the wall, though he held back from raising it. The sounds outside faded, replaced by the slow murmur of wind. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then from the forest's edge came a lone snap, the crisp break of a branch under weight. Grace's growl deepened, more urgent. Logan didn't blink, fixated on the darkness beyond the glass. Something lurked there, watching. Behind him, the fire crackled the only warmth amid a frozen silence. The forest had shifted. The air, once quiet and soft with snow, now carried a pressure that pressed even inside the cabin walls. The next morning after Grace's warning, Logan found the proof waiting just outside. Large paw prints were pressed deep into the frost at the tree line's edge. Not Grace's. These were broader, heavier steps marked with the quiet confidence of a hunter. Wolves. Logan crouched beside the prints, his breath misting the cold air. The tracks were fresh, no more than a few hours old. He followed them briefly until they disappeared into thick pines, where silence deepened like a heavy fog. Grace stayed close, tail lowered, ears twitching. She let out a low growl, a warning spoken without words. Back inside, Logan stacked extra firewood near the door and checked the rifle untouched for months. He hoped not to use it, but old habits of vigilance die hard. Grace remained by the window all afternoon, her eyes amber and watchful, scanning the shadowed forest beyond. The pups played a while longer before curling into a warm bundle by the stove, blissfully unaware of the darker edges lurking beyond their world. Logan gazed out as the snow swirled past the window, feeling the strange truth that danger could be both a familiar shadow and a distant threat all at once. In battle, danger was a roaring storm, bullets, explosions, chaos demanding instant attention. Here it lurked quietly. That evening, just as the sky darkened to a deep indigo, headlights emerged far away on the slope. Logan furrowed his brow, setting his mug down. Few ventured this deep into the lonely mountain roads. The vehicle halted outside his gate, a compact beige Subaru, old, yet cared for with devotion. The door swung open, and Margaret Dawson stepped out, clutching a thermos in one hand, a paper bag in the other. "Mrs. Dawson, you shouldn't be driving up here in this weather," Logan said, stepping into the biting cold. "Don't you Mrs. Dawson me?" She shot back, voice sharp but warm. "You think I'd let you hide away up here forever without hot soup?" She smiled, though a tiredness shadowed her eyes. Logan noticed her steps faltered balance, not quite sure. She slipped once on ice, and he caught her arm just before she could fall. "Easy now," he murmured. "Don't worry, I'm tougher than I look." She whispered, her laugh, shaky but real. The dogs welcomed her gently. Grace wagged her tail with cautious trust, then settled close to the fire, as if sensing this woman belonged to their small, loyal pack. The pups tumbled over her boots, drawing a soft, joyful laugh. "See," Margaret said warmly. "You got a family now, Logan Hayes, whether you planned for it or not." He poured her tea while she warmed the soup. Their conversation stretched over an hour, tales of the thawing valley, stories of wolves howling near her own land, and how she still baked pies every Sunday, even if no one came to share them. Her voice was tender, yet her eyes sometimes drifted into a distant loneliness, old wounds quietly lingering. She had made peace with solitude after all these years, but hadn't stopped yearning for a touch of connection. When she stood to leave, Logan insisted on escorting her to the car. The sharp wind carried soft, hesitant snowflakes as she stepped off the porch. Her foot hit a patch of slick ice. The world tipped sideways. She gasped and Logan caught her again, but this time she crumpled halfway down, face tight with pain. "Margaret," he called, kneeling beside her. My hip, she winced, clutching her side. "Oh heavens, I think I've really done it this time." Without a word, he helped her into the truck. The roads were narrow, half hidden beneath fresh snow, but behind the wheel his instincts were steady, calm, precise, the same unshakable focus that had steered him through fire and sandstorms. Grace barked as they pulled away, her figure shrinking in the rearview mirror. The descent was slow and treacherous. Margaret tried to keep the mood light. You'd think after 70 years these old bones would have learned to fall with grace. "Just keep talking," Logan urged, tightening his grip on the wheel. She smirked weakly, then grew serious. "Logan, people like you don't just vanish by accident. The world's still counting on protectors. Even when the battles evolve." He glanced at her, a weary resolve in his eyes. "I'm finished fighting." She shook her head, silver locks shimmering in the snowy light. "No, you're not. You're just discovering new ways to protect. Look at all you've done for those dogs. Maybe this has been your true purpose all along." When they arrived at Valley Hospital, a modest structure with 2 glowing windows and a faded red cross, Logan gently helped her inside. The nurse on duty, a young woman named Carla, stepped forward. Carla was in her early 30s, short and sturdy with a freckled, open face. Her movements were swift but filled with genuine warmth. "She'll be all right," Carla told him reassuringly. "Probably just a minor fracture. We'll keep her overnight." Margaret squeezed his hand as they wheeled her away. "Go back to your family," she said softly. "They're waiting for you." The drive home was quieter now. Snowfall thickened, muffling the crunch of tires on the road. By the time Logan reached the cabin, the forest stood like a wall of white shadows. He parked, grabbed the lantern, and headed to the door. Grace was already there, standing stiff with ears perked, her breath catching in sharp clouds. When Logan stepped onto the porch, she relaxed just a bit, but didn't move away. Behind her, flickering in the lantern light, the pups slept soundly on the rug. Logan frowned. "Good girl. You've been their guardian, haven't you?" Grace turned toward the window, then back at him, clearing her throat, as if urging him to look. Logan lifted the lantern. Beyond the glass, the forest loomed, silent, pitch black. Then movement, a shadow gliding low and deliberate among the trees. His heart quickened. The wolf. It stepped briefly into the light, a gray figure with pale eyes glowing as the lantern's reflection caught them. Larger than Grace, leaner fur, worn thin from the harsh winter. For a moment it stayed still, then padded towards the clearing. Steady, confident, fearless. Grace growled deep, a thunderous rumble from her chest. Logan's hand found the flare gun by the door. He opened it, loaded a single red flare, and braced himself. The wolf was now only about 20 yards away, breath billowing in the cold air. Grace stood beside him, no longer in front. Beside him, Logan raised the flare gun and fired. The red light shot upward, hissing through the night before, exploding in a fiery flare that stained the forest in crimson. The wolf froze, startled, then turned and slipped back into the shadowed woods. The sound of retreating paws dissolved into silence. For a long time, Logan and Grace stood in the doorway, watching the fading flare blend into the snowy night. His breath slowed and steadied his body, humming with the aftermath of adrenaline. When the last ember flickered out, he looked down at Grace. She was still fixed on the woods, muscles tense but calm. "You stayed," he whispered softly. Her ears twitched at his voice. She turned to him, clearing her throat, eyes shimmering with the dying light of the flare, and he sensed something shifting, a silent bond deeper than words. Inside, the fire crackled gently. Logan closed the door, the cabin once again wrapped in comforting warmth. Grace made a slow circle before settling down just inside the doorway, her body standing as a steadfast shield between the chill beyond and those resting safely inside. Logan knelt at her side, his fingers gently ruffling her fur. "Tonight, we saved each other," he murmured, his voice soft, but filled with conviction. Grace exhaled a calm breath, lowering her head gently onto her front paws. Outside, the wind whispered through the towering pines, sweeping away the last remnants of the night's shadows. Inside, a fragile peace returned, quiet, delicate, and profoundly real. The thaw that year unfolded with patient grace. By the end of March, the snow had begun to melt, creating shimmering rivulets that etched silver streaks into the dark earth beneath. The pines shed their heavy frost like a long winter's weight lifted, and for the first time in months, the cabin's roof no longer groaned beneath winter's burden. One morning, Logan stood on the porch, watching the fog rise slowly from the valley below, wrapped in the quiet anticipation of renewal. The air was thick with the scent of damp bark and cold soil, a whispered promise that spring was near. Grace lay stretched beside him, resting her head upon her paws. While the two pups tumbled clumsily in the mud near the stacked wood, their youthful energy undimmed. The smaller pup, once frail, had grown noticeably stronger, the limp almost imperceptible now, though Logan's concern flickered each time the little one faltered. He rubbed the back of his neck and offered a faint, hopeful smile. The cabin, once just a refuge for one wounded soul, now pulsed with life and new beginnings. Yet beneath that calm, a restless feeling took root within him. He no longer understood what it meant to truly stay here. That very morning, the mail carrier arrived steadily up the dirt path, bringing with her a breath of the outside world. Diane Miller was her name, a woman in her 50s. With broad shoulders and a face weathered by years of mountain winds, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun, and a spirit as sharp and resilient as the Cascade Range itself. She had run this route for nearly 2 decades, and she was one of the rare few who saw Logan not as a shadow, but as a living man. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," she called out, peeling off her wool cap with a brisk smile. "Feels like you're finally coming back to yourself, huh?" Logan nodded, taking the small stack of envelopes. "Feels like it," he said quietly. "You got something official looking there?" she asked, tapping the top envelope, a pristine white letter, marked with a blue emblem, from the Department of Veterans Affairs, if memory served. Maybe this was the good news they'd all been waiting for. He returned her a small, appreciative smile. "Thanks, Diane. Drive safe." She waved back before heading off toward her Jeep, whistling a tune carried by the crisp mountain air. Logan turned the envelope over in his hands, the return address reading, Veterans Wildlife Outreach Program, Helena Field Office. Carefully, he slid a small knife from his belt to open the letter, unfolding it with precise care. "Dear Mr. Hayes, we are reaching out to invite you to join the Veterans Wildlife Outreach Initiative, a collaborative effort designed to connect former service members with the vital work of rehabilitating injured wildlife throughout the Pacific Northwest. Your expertise in logistics and leadership, combined with your proven dedication to local wildlife recovery, makes you an ideal candidate for our upcoming spring training, which begins on April 10th in Missoula, Montana. The program includes field certification, housing accommodations, and a stipend to support your participation. We are confident your experience will leave a lasting, meaningful impact. The letter was signed in elegant blue ink by Nathaniel Reed, program director of the initiative, along with a stipend. We believe your experience holds the power to create lasting change. The letter was signed in crisp blue ink by program director Nathaniel Reed. Logan eased down onto the porch step, reading the letter over once more, with thoughtful eyes. A fresh silence embraced him, not emptiness, but the fertile hush of possibility. It awakened a feeling long buried inside him, purpose. He glanced toward Grace, who lifted her head at his shift, her steady gaze meeting his with calm reassurance. "Montana's got your kind of skies," he murmured softly. "Wide open, endless forests stretching farther than you can see." Yet even as the words left his lips, a tightness gripped his throat. "But what will happen to her and the pups if I walk away?" That evening he made the drive to see Margaret. The snow had finally melted enough for the roads to feel safe again, and she'd been discharged from the hospital weeks ago. Now walking with a cane, her back bent just slightly, her spirit remained sharp as ever. Her quaint home on the edge of Piney Creek held the soft scent of thawing apple trees and cinnamon. When she spotted Logan on the porch, her smile blossomed wide and warm. "Well, look who it is, the mountain man himself. Come in, come in. I've got pie and a tale to share." He stepped inside, taking in the cozy clutter stacks of worn books by the window-framed photos of soldiers and family, and the lingering, comforting aroma of freshly baked apples. She poured him tea and settled herself opposite, leaning on her cane. "You've got that look again," she said knowingly. "The one that says something's gnawing at your soul." Logan unfolded the letter and slid it across the table. "I got this today." Margaret adjusted her glasses and read in silence. When she finished, her gray eyes shone bright. "Logan, this is remarkable. It's exactly what you need to do." He sighed deeply. "I don't know," he admitted, voice catching as he hesitated, then added quietly, "Grace and the pups. They wouldn't understand if I walked away. They need me." Margaret's smile softened with tenderness. "Maybe they needed you once, but have you considered they might now be strong enough to need the world instead?" He furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" She leaned in a little closer. "Grace found you when you were both shattered. She trusted you because she saw something steady inside you. But animals heal quicker than we do, Logan. They know when to move forward. Maybe it's time for you to learn that too." Her words settled gently, like a quiet truth whispered into the room. Logan stared into his cup, watching the steam rise and twist. Margaret's voice softened, but remained certain. "Grace came into your life because she needed someone who refused to give up. And you stayed. You saved her, and she saved you. Now it's time for the next chapter. Don't be afraid to leave the mountain, Logan. Sometimes a forest needs fresh winds to keep it alive." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The ticking clock filled the quiet, marking the stretch between who he was and who he could become. Finally, he broke the silence, voice low and tentative. "You really think I should go?" She smiled softly. "I think it's time to stop just surviving and start truly living." That night back at the cabin, Logan sat by the fire with Grace and her pups nestled close. The smallest pup yawned, snuggling against his boot, while Grace rested her chin gently on his knee. He gazed down at her and softly murmured, "You'd manage just fine out there without me, wouldn't you?" Her tail thumped gently in reassurance. It wasn't a spoken reply, but it felt like one all the same. Turning back to his notebook, he carefully recorded April Missoula training begins. In the days that followed, Logan threw himself into preparing for what lay ahead. He fixed the small fence around the dog's shelter, stocked up on food, and started gentle daily training sessions with Grace, teaching her to obey commands, to hone her tracking instincts, to trust the distance again. The pups clumsily copied her every move, tumbling after her like little shadows. Every day felt like a lesson in learning to let go. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge, Margaret appeared again, walking deliberately with her cane. She stood silently on the porch, watching Logan guide Grace through hand signals in the clearing. "She's a natural," Margaret called out. "So was I," Logan replied with a faint smile. Once, when the training session ended, he sat beside Margaret on the porch. The mountains blushed pink in the fading light, while the first chorus of frogs rose from the thawed stream. "Spring's coming fast," she whispered. "You'll be ready by then?" Logan nodded, his eyes on Grace and the pups at the forest's edge. The younger pup barked at a rabbit before tumbling over his own paws, and Logan chuckled softly. "Yeah," he breathed. "We'll all be ready." He finally knew what he had to do. When spring arrived, Grace would roam free again, strong, wild, and fearless. And he would drive north into Montana to teach other veterans everything she had taught him, that sometimes saving another soul is the only way to save your own. That night, wrapped in the hum of crickets and the forest's distant whisper, Logan made his decision. The letter lay open next to his lamp. He signed it with steady hands, folded it carefully, and set it inside an envelope. Tomorrow he would send it. For the first time since the war, something inside him felt clear. He had a purpose once more. By April, the Cascade Mountains had transformed entirely. The ice that had clenched the valley for months finally yielded to the tender touch of spring. Streams sparkled as fresh water poured down the slopes in graceful ribbons, ushering in new life. The pines no longer wore frost's gray, but gleamed with rain's fresh glow, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers awakening. Logan stood on the cabin porch, eyes fixed on the towering maple tree just beyond the clearing. Its once bare branches now quivered with fragile green buds. Below it, Grace rested peacefully in the grass, her two pups no longer tiny, wrestling playfully in the sunlight. For weeks he had readied this moment. Each morning he ventured deeper into the woods with them, letting Grace lead while he followed behind. The pups quickly learned to heed their mother's low growl, to freeze when the wind carried foreign scents, to move silently through the brush. Grace had reclaimed her true self, a creature of the wild. Her fur gleamed under the sun, muscles lean and powerful beneath the black and tan coat. He had rebuilt her strength, but she had restored his courage. That morning he settled on the porch steps. Hands interlocked the VA program letter, neatly tucked inside his jacket pocket. The truck was ready loaded with the few possessions he had left. He'd be heading to Montana in just 2 days. But first, he needed to say goodbye to Grace. The crunch of tires on gravel pulled him back from his reverie. He glanced up to see Margaret's old green sedan laboring up the driveway, its engine rasping like a weary smoker. A faint smile touched his lips, and he rose to greet her. When she stepped out, she leaned heavily on her cane, yet her eyes sparkled with undiminished life. She wore a delicate blue coat that seemed too light for the biting mountain cold, and her silver hair was gathered loosely into a bun. Goodness, she chuckled softly. You'd think this mountain would have mercy on an old woman by now. You should have called me, Logan said, steadying her as she closed the car door. I would have come to you. Nonsense, she replied, patting his hand gently. You'd have just found another excuse not to say goodbye. Inside, the cabin was warm, fragrant with pine smoke. Grace watched quietly from her window nook, her tail flicking with mild curiosity. The pups, bold as ever, scampered up to sniff Margaret's shoes. My, they've really grown, she said, grinning. You'll have your work cut out if you try to keep them all. I won't, Logan said softly. They leave today. Margaret's smile softened. Ah, the day always comes, doesn't it? They sat together at the table, steam rising from the mugs of coffee Margaret insisted on brewing herself. Reaching into her bag, she produced a small, worn object, a brown leather-bound Bible, its edges frayed and the gold lettering faded by time. This belonged to Tom, she said, her thumb tracing the cover. He'd read it when night stretched too long to sleep. After the war, he said it was the one thing that reminded him the world wasn't solely filled with pain. Logan regarded it with hesitation. I can't accept this, Margaret. You can and you will, she said firmly, pressing it into his palms. You don't have to read it. Just keep it close. When you save a life, when you heal something broken, human or animal, God helps you live again. Tom believed that. So do I. Her words settled heavy, yet comforting in his chest. He opened the book and saw faint handwriting inside the front cover. For Tom Dawson, come home safe. He swallowed hard. Thank you. She smiled, eyes shimmering. You already thanked me the day you began living again. They talked a while longer about Montana and how she'd soon be moving to a retirement home down in Ellensburg. Don't worry about me, she said, noticing his concern. I'll have plenty of people to keep me company there. Maybe even someone my age who still loves to dance. When she finally stood to leave, Logan walked her to the car. Grace followed halfway, then stopped under the maple tree watching. Margaret reached down to stroke the dog's head. Take care of him, Grace, she whispered, then looked up at Logan and added softly, and you take good care of yourself. After the car vanished down the road, the mountain fell silent once more, save for the wind rustling through the swaying branches. Logan turned toward the maple tree where Grace stood with the pups by her side, the sunlight catching the fine edge of her fur. He drew a steady breath. The moment had come. Quietly, he walked to the back of the cabin and unlatched the wooden gate of their modest enclosure. The hinge gave a soft creak, like the whisper of something coming to an end. Grace met his gaze calm, yet watchful, as if she already knew. "Go ahead," he murmured. "It's your time now." For a brief moment she hesitated. The pup sniffed the open air, whimpering softly, uncertain of what lay beyond. Then Grace stepped forward, nudging each pup gently, leading them in steady strides towards the forest. Her every